Hello again from Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin, broadcasting from Rigel Studios here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This show is about guns, related politics, and self-defense. Fired Up is on my website, Fired Up with Bob Irwin, as well as the American Guns and Glory Network, YouTube, and numerous other media. If your local internet provider doesn't carry Fired Up, ask them to do that. A new show is posted every Thursday around 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Our audio feed is rebroadcast for radio listeners on Saturdays at noon on the Nevada Talk Network. Check out KELY1230.com for the station in your area of Nevada. Comments can be sent to bob@firedupmail.com or leave a message at 702-257-1060. Please leave your contact information. There are several hundred defensive uses of firearms each week in the United States. I always select a few for each show for my listeners' education. A note here, the lawyers finally got to me and a new disclaimer has been added at the end of the show. So when we get to the end, stay tuned for one more second so you can get all this legalese I paid a lot of money for. Now, this first story comes from WPVI Channel 6 ABC. A journalist named Taronda Thomas reported November 30, 2020 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A man who stopped for late-night takeout in a Northwest Philadelphia eatery found himself in the middle of a robbery in progress. This happened at around 10:30 Sunday night at the Wing Stop in the 2100 block of Cottman Avenue. The suspect, later identified as a 53-year-old male, came in wearing a mask and gloves. Philadelphia Police Department Chief Inspector Scott Small said the subject walked in, went behind the counter, announced a robbery, and asked for all the money. Before the three employees who were inside could comply with his demand, a customer walked in while talking on his cell phone. The chief inspector added, "That's when the robber pointed his gun at that customer and demanded his cell phone." The 27-year-old customer quickly decided to fight back. The customer pulled his gun and fired one shot at the would-be robber, striking him in the neck. The customer, who does have a valid concealed carry permit, stayed at the scene. Chief Inspector Small added, "We do have his weapon. We know that just one shot was fired from that customer because we found one spent shell casing on the floor on the customer's side of the counter." Police found the suspect lying on the floor behind the counter, bleeding. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The customer who intervened and the employees spoke with homicide detectives who will look to the surveillance cameras inside the restaurant to make sure that their story checks out. At this point, the police say it does not look like the customer who fired the fatal shot will face any charges. Police say the suspect had prior run-ins with the law. Comments here, walking in on a robbery in progress usually raises the problem of who is the good guys and who is the bad guy. This is especially true when almost everybody is wearing masks and gloves. When the robber points his firearm at the customer and demands his cell phone, that problem is certainly cleared up. The surveillance video will show this to be a good self-defense shooting. The criminal history of the perp does add to the validity of the shooting. It really doesn't add to the validity of the shooting, but it could help if a civil lawsuit arises over this. Sometimes carry permit holders are just in the right place at the right time. Next story. This is from KTLA TV5. That's actually in Los Angeles. Reported November 30, 2020 in Redlands, California. A shooting took place just after 5 in the morning in the 100 block of East Redlands Boulevard. A transient is suspected of tunneling through a wall. That got him into the property management office in Redlands. According to the Redlands Police Department news release, the owner had gone to check on the property after the alarm went off. He opened the door and found the intruder. There was a confrontation, at which time the suspect rushed toward the owner, prompting him to open fire. The intruder was shot at least once in the chest. Responding officers provided life-saving measures until paramedics arrived and treated the injured man at the scene. They then took the intruder to Loma Linda University Medical Center. The intruder, identified as a 37-year-old, was determined to have tunneled through an adjacent wall into the office after breaking into a neighboring business. Prior to the incident, officers had responded to an alarm call at the location, but couldn't find any signs of forced entry. Police noted that multiple burglaries had been reported at the complex in the past week. They did not provide any additional details. The 37-year-old suspect was last reported to be in critical condition. Charges have not been filed against the business owner yet. Comments here: sounds like a good shooting, but it's a bit of a he said, she said. Hopefully the physical evidence, blood spatter, scuff marks, etc., will back up the shooter's statements. The prior police responses to the location indicate this had been going on for some time. That adds to the credibility of the shooter. So far, so good. You always have this, there's only two people in the room, and one's dead, and the other says, this is what happened. Anyway, we're going to break for a word from a few of our friends and associates. I'll be right back.
Freestyle Martial Arts, located at Jones and Russell here in Las Vegas. You can reach them at 702-551-9009. That's 702-551-9009. CCS Gunsmithing. Chris Eifelt, the man who does all the NRA help, he's at 2216 South Rainbow Boulevard near Sahara. He can be reached at 702-365-1732. Once again, 702-365-1732. Jerry Creed, a trust attorney. If you have a firearms trust or need one, this is your guy. You can reach Jerry at 702-806-7777. That is 702-806-7777. CCW Maggie is found all over the internet. You can reach her by phone at 702-375-5900. That's 702-375-5900. All sorts of firearms training, ladies only classes. She is the best of the best. Call CCW Maggie.
And as promised, here I am again. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a journalist named Kim Bell, reported November 30, 2020 in Jennings, Missouri, a 14-year-old boy suspected in an attempted carjacking was shot by the car's owner. The attempted robbery occurred at 9301 Lewis and Clark Boulevard in the parking lot of a gas station. Police were notified about 3:45 Sunday afternoon and found the car's owner and the juvenile nearby. The boy was identified as a local living in the 5100 block of Lexington. The St. Louis Police Sergeant Benjamin Granda said the man who fired the fatal shot was 53 years old. He was taken into custody by police and was cooperating with investigators. The juvenile had an accomplice who got away, but no description of him has been released. After being shot, the 14-year-old juvenile tried to run away, but was found by officers near the scene, suffering from a gunshot wound to the chest. Excuse me. He was taken to a hospital where he died hours later. Police recovered guns from the man and the boy. He said it wasn't clear if the suspects fired a weapon. The 53-year-old shooter's vehicle was a Cadillac CTS, and officers believe the suspects entered the vehicle but did not leave the property in it, apparently meaning the 14-year-old stole some items. He did not leave the property in it. That means he stole some items. Anyone with information is asked to call the St. Louis County Police at 636-529-8210. Anonymous tipsters can receive cash rewards by calling Crime Stoppers at 866-371-8477. Comments here are tough cases. It's always tough cases when a youngster is the perp. A carjacking at gunpoint is certainly a dangerous crime, and this was a clear lethal threat to the vehicle's owner. The inevitable reaction of family members and some media will be no child should ever be shot under these circumstances. So if the victim here is just supposed to let himself be murdered, I have worked several cases where a suspect of similar age was the aggressor. This is another example of my belief that nobody ever actually wins gunfights. We're going to break for the commercial about my book, ta-da, that is available on Amazon. I'll be back in just a few. Don't go away. My latest book, Self-Defense with Firearms, Use of Force in Nevada, is now available on Amazon Kindle for $4.95. You can download it now. It contains examples of dozens of shootings and pointing a firearm cases that I personally experienced in my 24 years in law enforcement, or where I testified in court or deposition as a firearm and use of force expert. The book is about the use of firearms in defense of yourself and others in my home state of Nevada. I have appeared as an expert witness in Nevada courts dozens of times, and that experience has shown me the necessity of putting pen to paper once again. Nevada state law as printed can be misleading to those of you who read it, as it is written in legal jargon, what I usually call lawyer speak. These statutes are also bent or even broken by the courts in their everyday decisions that we generally call case law. Those are rulings that say this or that statute does not apply in a particular incident and similar cases. That causes the law you are depending on when you make a decision to use your firearm only partially or not apply at all to your actions. Relevant Nevada statute numbers are included here and there, so readers may look up current wording on the Nevada State website. Teaching firearms in 28 law enforcement academies, including cadets from 26 different Nevada agencies, personally instructing over 30,000 concealed firearm permit students and 20,000 private security officers, I've discovered a lot of commonalities in deadly force incidents. Less than 100 pages, this book offers advice that can save lives and costs of expensive defense lawyers to reduce your losses in the inevitable civil lawsuits that follow these incidents. Get a copy, learn how to avoid, prepare for, and react to life-threatening situations. And I'm back. This next story comes again from KTLA TV5. A journalist named Jennifer Gould reported November 30, 2020 in Compton, California. Sheriff's deputies responded to the intersection of Compton Boulevard and Santa Fe Avenue shortly after 8:30 in the evening when someone reported hearing gunshots in the area. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stated in a news release, a man was found lying in the intersection and pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators believe the man, who was armed with a handgun, had tried to carjack a vehicle that was stopped for a red light when he was shot by the motorist. Stopped at a red light and they try to carjack you in the intersection. The unidentified man had at least one gunshot wound resulting from a carjacking attempt and died at the scene by being shot by the intended victim. The carjacker was then run over by at least one vehicle. The shooter stayed at the scene and was talking to investigators. The Sheriff's Department Lieutenant Alfred said it was unclear whether the suspect was hit by one or more vehicles. The driver or drivers did not remain at the scene. Officers have not determined whether the man's death was the result of the gunfire or being struck by a vehicle. It's also unknown if the motorist who shot the suspect was legally carrying a firearm. Anyone with further information is asked to call the Sheriff's Department at area code 323-890-5500. Those who prefer to remain anonymous can call Crime Stoppers at 800-222-8477. Comments here. This is an awful case. Witnesses need to come forward to help this carjacking victim prove his self-defense case. He did the right thing by staying at the scene and giving statements to investigators. The crime scene investigators may help with their blood spatter diagnosis and looking at the dents and so forth. Hopefully, the individual that was carjacked was legally carrying his firearm. Without some help, it may be hard for him to literally prove his innocence. That being said, I need to go into something here. Witnesses are sometimes hard to find in Los Angeles. The community relations between law enforcement and citizens is strained, to put it mildly. The Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles Police Department are both trying to change this with numerous community outreach programs. Perhaps the Anonymous Crime Stoppers program will help clarify this case. If you know something about it, call. This guy did the right thing. He needs witness statements. Story number 5. The Wichita Falls Times Record News, to get it correctly, a journalist named Christopher Walker reported December 1, 2 days ago, 2020, in Wichita Falls, Texas. Officers were sent to the long Hispanic name that I can't pronounce grocery store on Broad Street Tuesday morning for the report of an assault with a weapon. The victim reported he had the male suspect at gunpoint. When the officers arrived, they recognized the suspect and as to who he was and took him into custody. The victim told police he got to work and found the male suspect standing in an alley near the building. He told the male suspect he needed to leave, but instead the male suspect attempted to assault him. The victim said the male suspect tried to punch him, so he punched back a couple of times in self-defense. The male suspect pulled a knife from his pocket, so the property guy drew his gun from his holster and held his attacker at gunpoint until police arrived. Police spoke to a witness and watched the surveillance video. Police arrested the attacker and charged him with assault with a deadly weapon. He was rather easy to identify because he has a number of facial tattoos. If you can pull up this story, you got to look at a picture of this guy. You'd know him a block away if you ever saw him again. This self-defense case would work pretty much the same in any jurisdiction in America. If someone threatens you with a knife, you may point your firearm back at him. If you are not in America, but rather in California, Washington State, or New York City, you are required by local law to let the guy murder you. That's being very sarcastic, but that is absolutely what's going on in that part of America now, and it's about to get worse. We're going to break one more time for a few words from our friends and associates. I'll be back with another story. Don't go away.
Attorney Donald J. Green, a common guest of mine on Fired Up. He can be reached at 702-409-8239. He specializes in gun case litigation. He is your man. Don Green, 702-409-8239. And Battlefield Vegas, my new kind of home for this show. They're on Circus Drive, directly behind the Circus Hotel and Casino. You can find them there with CCW classes and an amazing place for gun rentals, everything you could possibly imagine. Check out, if you're in town as a tourist, check out battlefieldvegas.com.
Okay, story number 6. The Detroit News, a journalist named James David Dixon, reported December 2nd, 2020, yesterday from the time we're doing this show. 19-year-old man was shot in the leg Tuesday night on Detroit's east side. Latrice Crawford, a spokeswoman for the Detroit Police Department, said the shots were fired about 9 p.m. in a home on the 16,600 block of Fairmont. That's north of East State Fair and west of Kelly, if you know where your way around Detroit. The man was allegedly spotted on a surveillance camera entering the home earlier in the day, but was never seen inside or found. Later that night, the 38-year-old homeowner heard noises. She grabbed a gun and moved toward the sound. It was coming from the attic. Police say she entered the attic and warned whoever was there to show themselves. When he did not, and she saw movement, she fired and struck the man. When officers arrived, they applied a tourniquet and then paramedics transported him to a hospital. He is listed in stable condition and is in police custody. When medically able, police will transport him to the Detroit Detention Center. Comments here, this is another incident where I encourage calling 911 and let the professionals handle it. I know you all want to go hunting yourself, but consider there may be several perps and they may be armed. This worked out in this case, which is great. This is a brave lady. The next story is a little different from Detroit. Story 7, MI Headlines, it stands for Michigan Headlines, reports November 30 in Detroit, Michigan, in the 17,600 block of Fenton, a 22-year-old male suspect armed with a long gun entered a home without permission. Once inside, he confronted an occupant of the home at gunpoint. Not a lot of details, this just happened. So at some point during this incident, the resident produced his handgun and fired multiple shots at the 22-year-old male suspect. striking him and fatally wounding him. Medics responded to the location and pronounced the 22-year-old intruder dead at the scene. Officers recovered both weapons from the scene. The homeowner, who is a CPL holder, it's the initials for a carry license holder, had a CCW in our carry permit, in our normal parlance here, was detained for questioning. The circumstances surrounding this incident are still being investigated. Anyone with information is asked to please call Detroit Police Department's Homicide Unit. They are at 313-596-2260 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-SPEAK-UP, SPEAKUP, 1-800-SPEAK-UP. Comments here. Compared to our previous story, this intruder clearly meant business. Having a firearm and the necessary training to use it properly is what saves lives. Having the will and the skill. We're almost there. Hold on for the disclaimer at the end. You can check out my recent shows at firedupwithboberwin.com. It contains several dozen episodes. Please patronize our friends and supporters. Most of these businesses need help. Go buy something. I'll be back next Thursday on my website, firedupwithboberwin.com, the American Guns and Glory Network, numerous other websites, television, and radio stations. When watching any media, just click on subscribe, and new shows will be sent to your phone or computer automatically. My logo merchandise, hats, shirts, and books, mostly books, are available at Battlefield Vegas, just behind Circus Circus on the Las Vegas Strip. If you are ever in Las Vegas, Battlefield is a must-see attraction. You can shoot a minigun or any of hundreds of firearms, or even crush a car with an Abrams tank at their outdoor facility. Yeah, they have an Abrams tank and you can drive it over a car. Transportation is provided. You can contact info@battlefieldvegas.com. Thank you for watching Fired Up. I'll be back next week. Wait right here. Here comes my new disclaimer.